Well, Vernon Watkins, it's a very great pleasure for me to have this opportunity to have a chat with you about the poetry of Edward Thomas. I know that you've had a very long-lasting interest in his poetry, and yet, like me, you've never met Edward Thomas, and consequently you have to try to get in touch with this poet's personality entirely through his work. Do you find him an easy poet to understand?
No, really. I think he is very intricate and subtle. I really came to his poetry very young. I think I was still in my teens, or just about 20, when I got the collected book of poems. And even then I recognized the difference between him and W.H. Davis, whose charm is so direct. I thought them both good poets. It was Edward that I preferred at this time, and I find his poetry for me has lasted very well, partly because of this subtlety, which I think is so elusive, and it seems to rely on a kind of silence between simple statements for its effect. You read a poem aloud, and it's almost the silence between the lines that makes for the subtlety that defies analysis, you see. I think there is a kind of innate melancholy in him which comes out in the poems. Sometimes it's suspended and he feels great exaltation, but I think he always returns to it, and it has a kind of quality, rather like some, I think of a kind of very intricate china or ware that is very, very durable because of some deep charm in the pattern, that you can't plumb it or find the secret.
Yes, I see. I was very taken with your idea of it being something like china or porcelain, something deep hidden. He was, in so many ways, an elegant man in himself, and yet he identified himself so closely with nature and with ordinary people. He wrote, as you know, a great deal of prose about nature and about rural England and even about Wales. And yes, I know that your own poetry has to me anyhow, a very deeply grounded sense of place, and I think I know some of the place. And I was thinking, I wasn't trying to compare you and Edward Thomas in this respect at all. I was thinking specifically of his own poetry. Do you think that Edward Thomas is principally a nature poet?
No. I know that I myself am not a nature poet, that I always see nature in relation to man, although I've been mistaken for one. I would never mistake Edward Thomas for a nature poet. In the Wordsworthian sense, this kind of communion with nature, because in Wordsworth, the more communion he has with nature, the deeper the joy, the sensibility runs so deep that one almost gets out of one's depth because his relationship is so deep and subtle. Well, in Edward Thomas, this kind of shadow of melancholy falls across his feeling for nature. Now, he loved the countryside, and I think his poems are rooted in the things of the country. He knew all the names of birds and flowers, and all the wildlife of the country breathes and throbs in his poetry. Now, his lines have a kind of crookedness, a very slight irregularity, and to me this is rather like the rooty life of the country, organic life. I mean, the birds in his poetry are real birds. He knows them as well as his own hands, and the colours, they're true colours, and they're all in perspective, and they're crossed by his meditating shadow as he walks along. He seems to pace his mood with nature. He's a poet of mood, and he has this extraordinary gift of casting his mood into the poem and then taking you out of it at the end. He will be distracted by some detail in nature which catches his eye, and the poem will transfer itself to this thing, and the poem will suddenly end. This is very subtle and elusive, I think, not at all typical of what might be called nature poetry.
I know that Edward Thomas's poetry, to me anyhow, seems consciously to have been written for the spoken voice, poetry that's been written to be read. So I think that to round off our conversation, would you care to read one or two of his poems for us? I think that this would be the best tribute to him.
I'd love to do that, because I think what you said is very true, that he has, Frost has this extraordinary gift of putting conversation into very strict metrical form, and Edward Thomas, in his own way, has exactly the same gift of reproducing the cadence of natural speech. I should say he's one of the most intimate of all 20th century poets. He can actually, you are almost rubbing shoulders with the people who are talking in his poems. He catches not only the cadence, but the tone of what is said. And his own personality is there too. One is also conscious of that. Well, there's part of the Child on the Cliff poem I would like to read at the beginning,
Yes.
just to show this. And listen now. Can you hear what I hear far out? Now and then the foam there curls and stretches a white arm out like a girl's. Fishes and gulls ring no bells. There cannot be a chapel or church between here and Devon, with fishes or gulls ringing its bell. Hark! Somewhere under the sea or up in heaven. It's the bell, my son, out in the bay on the buoy. It does sound sweet today. Sweeter I never heard, mother, no, not in all Wales. I should like to be lying under that foam, dead, but able to hear the sound of the bell, and certain that you would often come and rest listening happily. I should be happy if that could be.